As much as it pains me to say this, I have to hop on to bring about a true fact inside the sport of hockey. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Thomas. You're tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel, coming to you live from One Buffalo, New York. And that might be a preface to what I'm about to say in regards to the Stanley Cup Final, which featured the Washington Capitals and the Las Vegas Golden Knights. The Las Vegas Golden Knights had a fantastic season. They were the Cinderella story of the season. They really overachieved in every which way. They were a fantastic story, a truly fascinating story, how they were able to put everything together in just their first season as a franchise with an entire new team, plucking players from the remaining 30 NHL teams, being that the Golden Knights were the 31st team in the National Hockey League that were introduced during the NHL entry-level draft in 2018. And I think for sentimental value, for the story value, storybook ending, that it would have been amazing that, had Vegas been able to pull this off, would have been great. Would have been the biggest upset probably in sports history in terms of fact that the Golden Knights were that expansion franchise, that the Vegas odds makers didn't have Vegas really going above and beyond and making it to the playoffs, let alone making it to the Stanley Cup Final, which, in my personal opinion, the two sports that it is very, very tough to make it to the championship is baseball and hockey. But I would lean towards hockey, being that you really have to have everything fall into place in those two sports. But with hockey, I think especially chemistry is so key. Shift in and shift out, game in and game out, minute by minute, period by period, that you need everything to go your way. You need to have a solid offense, you need to have a solid defense, and you need to have a solid goaltender. And all those three things firing on all cylinders at one time can lead to a truly dominant hockey team. Whereas when you have two of those three things working, or maybe one of those three things working, it can only get you so far. And I think that's a little bit what we saw with Washington. Washington this season, throughout the NHL season, they were well-versed, to say the least. They had a solid offense. They had a solid defense. They had a solid goaltender in Holtby, who I really like. He's one of my favorite goaltenders in the league currently, as the league currently stands. Holtby is fantastic. And when all those three things are firing on all cylinders and the Capitals are able to make it happen, due to that, they're a very tough team to stop. Any team is a tough team to stop when they have all three of those things working, all three of those things firing on all cylinders. So going into the playoffs, I thought Washington would be a real test this year as opposed to years past. They've been knocking on that door of the Stanley Cup Final for a long time, all throughout Alexander Ovechkin's career, essentially. And they were finally able to break that wall down, being that they had the team that they had always needed in order to break that wall down, or even to attempt to break that wall down. And then the Western Conference, you had Vegas, you had San Jose, you had some decent teams, but really Vegas, the chemistry, coaching, everything kind of meshed well with this band of guys that they deemed themselves to be cast-offs, being that the teams that they played for did not essentially feel that they were quote-unquote good enough, and they made the most of their opportunity on that team in 2020 or in 2018, parlaying themselves maybe into better money and maybe a long-term situation on another team, or with the Golden Knights, which I think we'll start to see that as the years, these next 2 years or so go by. We will start to see players leave Vegas. We'll start to see players leave Vegas for some of the more notorious franchises in the league, to say the least. Guys like the teams like the Montreal Canadiens, teams like the New York Rangers, the Boston Bruins, you name it. Maybe even the Sabres. But I truly feel, and you can look at each and every game, whether the Capitals were the most well-versed team in comparison to the Las Vegas Golden Knights, or the Vegas Golden Knights as they call themselves. The reason why the Capitals won this series is because it's very rare in hockey when a team gets somewhat of an upset victory, especially in the Stanley Cup final. Hockey itself does not allow these Cinderella stories to come to full fruition, full circle, with a championship Stanley Cup victory. And I can only speak from personal experience, being a Buffalo Sabres fan. The most damning portion of being a Buffalo Sabres fan, I would say, in this last decade, is the 05 to 06 season, where the Buffalo Sabres were projected by Sporting News magazine to be the worst team in the National Hockey League. They literally scoffed at the idea of the Sabres trading Chris Gratton for Daniel Briere, and they scoffed at the idea of taking a afterthought, a third-line center, a guy that really bounced around the NHL, and Chris Drury, a guy that was a leader, a known leader around the National Hockey League, but somebody that might have been on borrowed time. Boy, was that magazine ever wrong. You can look that up. 2005 NHL season preview in Sporting News magazine. The Sabres were ranked dead last as far as what these experts and analysts ranked the Sabres in 2005 for the 2005 to 2006 season. They defied all the odds. They defied expectations. Soon before that, the team underwent an ownership transition from the Regises to Tom Golisano. And it was known that he bought the team to save the team, but he really didn't have much of a rooting interest in terms of knowing the game. I would say Terry Pegula, their current owner, has far more of a rooting interest. He's much more of a sports fan as opposed to Golisano, who it really was just a good business investment for him. Bought the team for around $60 million, made triple that when the team was purchased from him by Terry Pegula about 5 years later. As a sidebar there, and they went through all this just amazing ascent that season, and it all went for nothing due to the fact that when they made it to the Eastern Conference semis versus the Carolina Hurricanes, they lost their entire front four defense that led them to that point, and obviously started for them up to that point. Jay McKee being one of those guys. I remember the 2005 season, they had Doug Janik, Jeff Gilson, and if I look it up here, we didn't have a shot after that. I mean, it really took the wind out of our sails in terms of what we were looking to do, what we were trying to do. 52-24. Brian Campbell was out. Teppo Nuneman was out. Henrik Kalinder was out. Jay McKee was out. Doug Janik, Jeff Gilson stepped in. Rory Fitzpatrick. Those were the guys that had to fill those slots. And Doug Janik actually scored a goal in the final game that ended up being, the final game of their season, that Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals. So to say the least, it was very, very tough to see that team go that far and then, have that happen to them. Have it turn into essentially their season was lost based on injuries. And at that time, I thought, well, it really means to me that hockey itself will not allow these upset. And I'm not saying like the hockey gods are intervening. I really believe in some sort of higher power when it comes to sports, because when I predicted this series and I went on the audio side of the podcast and tried to give my prediction for the series as far as what I believed would happen, I thought there is no way that hockey, the sport of hockey, will allow the Vegas Golden Knights to become the Stanley Cup champions. And what I meant by that was not that the refs or there's any conspiracy theories or any refs trying to make this fixed. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that hockey itself is a sport that the best team usually always wins. It's very tough for me to find a case of an upset. So, in my personal opinion, take it for what it's worth. I think that the Washington Capitals simply beat the Vegas Golden Knights because they were the better team. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take. Take care.